65. And in 1935, when the United States passed the Social Security Act, the average life expectancy was 61.7 at birth, and the normal retirement age was 65. But for those that ended up living to 65, it was 12.5 years. Fast forward to 1983, the last time we did Social Security reform, the average life expectancy at birth was 74.6 years. And if you lived to 65, you were expected to live another 16.4. Today, the average life expectancy at birth is 79 years. And if you live to 65, you're expected to live another 19.6. And that's going up. Now, it's not all equal. There are differences by income level. There are differences by race. There are differences by ethnicity. But these are the averages. And so as a result, we've got a situation where we've got people who are living longer. At the same point in time, we have very low birth rates. We have lower legal immigration rates. And that puts a strain on the finances of the Social Security and Medicare systems, which are two primary social insurance programs for seniors. Okay. And now we've got a situation where, we expect the so-called trust funds and Social Security for the retirement income to go to zero at the end of 2032. And if we don't reform it, that's a 22 to 28% cut across the board. Medicare Part A is supposed to go to zero in 2033. If we don't reform it, that's an 11% cut in reimbursements across the board. And so we're in a situation where we have a dual problem. We have a problem with regard to our overall finances, and we have a problem with regard to the finances of our Social Security and Medicare programs. And both of them need to be addressed sooner rather than later because they're large, they're known, they're growing. So the longer that you wait, the bigger the changes have to be, the less time you have to phase them in, and the more uncertainty that you create, for individuals, for investors, and for a variety of other players. So, and last thing I would say as an opening is you got to keep in mind, Social Security was never intended to be the primary form of retirement income for people. It was intended to be the foundation that you would build on through supplemental employer-sponsored retirement programs and supplemental individual savings. Unfortunately, today, over half of people on Social Security rely on it for their primary or sole source of retirement income. Wasn't intended to be that way, but that's the way it is. And with the demographic challenges that we face, it's more important than ever that we recognize these realities and start making the reforms sooner rather than later. And that, in part, is what my next book is about.
Yeah, and just as a refresher, you talk a little bit about, before we dive into this basic progression, before we bring in the panel, the difference between the federal deficit and the national debt, just for those of us, because sometimes those get interchanged.
Oh, you're right. Yeah, let me give you, well, first, the deficit is the difference between revenues that come in a given year and expenditures for the given year. All right. So to the extent that you're spending more than you're taking in, that's a deficit. The debt is accumulation of all activity over the years. In other words, in most years, we ran deficits. In a few years, we ran surpluses. In the first 4 years I was Comptroller General of the United States, 1998 through 2001, we ran surpluses. In 2 of those years, we actually paid down debt. But since then, we've been running deficits of differing magnitudes and accumulating debt at an increasingly rapid pace. So deficits are the annual results. Debt is the accumulation of what's happened over time. And even with those, you get different numbers. And let me give an example.
Yeah, please.
The federal government keeps its books on a cash basis, cash in, cash out. That's how the budget is done. But we also publish accrual-based financial statements, and the deficits on an accrual basis, where you have to consider things like pensions and retiree health care and a variety of other things. The deficits on an accrual basis are bigger than the deficits on a cash basis. And then secondly, we have the debt held by the public, which is one number, And then we have debt that's held by the so-called trust funds, Social Security, Medicare, transportation, civilian and military pensions, if you will. And so one number is about 31 trillion or so, 31.6, I think, which is the debt held by the public. And then the total debt, which is what you see on the debt clock, is about 39.5 trillion. So, it's bottom line is they're all bad. Okay.
39.5 trillion. So where are we today compared to where we were in the year?
We're about 39.5 trillion in total debt subject to the debt ceiling. We're about 125% of GDP on total debt. We're about 100% of GDP on just debt held by the public. But here's what's important. It's not where we've been. It's not where we are. It's where we're headed. Let's take the debt held by the public, which is what most economists want to use rather than the total debt. All right. Right now, it's about 100% of GDP, a little over that. It's projected to go to 175 within 30 years if we don't make reforms. Okay. We won't get there. We won't get there. Okay. And it's important that we start taking steps now to make sure that we never even come close to that. Because that's third world nation status for finances.
No, I mean, that's just amazing. So it used to be just a few $1 trillion. Now we're 39, $40 trillion. Let's break this down into what it means. This show is called Economics Monday, just base economics, right? The average American today, I think in your podcast, you talked about the median income being between $57,000 and $70,000. We have typically what's happened is Republicans say, well, let's lower taxes. Democrats might say, let's increase spending. So what does that mean in terms of retirement, in terms of how it's affecting the bottom line? There's got to be a number of what does that mean to the average American today? What is this federal deficit costing them, the national debt?
Well, it affects us in several ways, okay? The second largest and fastest growing expense that we have in the federal government is interest on the debt. And what do you get for interest? Nothing. Yes. So to the extent that we end up paying more money in interest, it's less money that we have for other things, whether it be for investments or whether it be for social insurance programs or whatever. Okay. We've got a situation where the federal government has grown too big, promised too much, subsidized too many, lost control of the budget, undercut states' rights, and is not managed for outcome-based results. Other than that, you could say things are okay, but I would say those are all unacceptable things. And so if we don't put our finances in order, keep in mind, the leading indicator to become a superpower and the leading indicator to lose superpower status over time has been economic strength. And if you can't put your finances in order, you will not maintain economic strength. If we don't end up putting our finances in order, then it's only a matter of time before we have a so-called debt crisis. What would a debt crisis look like? A debt crisis would look like we're trying to sell our debt, but we can't sell at reasonable interest rates. It's the old supply and demand, right? We're in a tough situation right now because we're having to sell more debt, and yet the appetite to buy our debt is diminished. And so what does that mean? That means that you end up having to pay higher interest rates. It hasn't spiraled out of control yet, but we've got a compounding problem to where we're having to sell more debt and we're having to pay higher interest rates. The combination of those two things, causes the problem to escalate dramatically. I believe that if we don't change course, and we need to do it sooner rather than later, that we will have a debt crisis, a crisis of confidence in our ability to put our finances in order. And what does that mean? It means not only a significant depression in the United States, it means global, because we are the largest economy. The dollar is the largest reserve currency. It would be a global depression. It would end up having a serious adverse effect on our defense capabilities. It would embolden our adversaries. And it would end up resulting in significant hardship domestically, as well as significant domestic tranquility problems domestically. I would respectfully suggest we don't want to see that day, and we don't have to see that day. But to avoid that, we have to start making tough choices on our social insurance programs as well as our overall finances. And that's what the next book is all about: saving Social Security in America, common sense solutions. Stay tuned.
Before we open up to the panel, we're gonna open up to the panel in just 2 minutes, but let's just talk about at a high level what needs to change with our Social Security system, the Medicaid, Medicare that you've talked about, and maybe in your book you talk about it. So you're giving us a reason to go get the book. What are the things that we need to do from a congressional perspective?
Yeah, let's start with Social Security, and then we can open it to the panel, and we can
let's open up the panel. Right.
Because that's first. My frustration is Social Security is the easiest thing to reform. And why do I say that? Because our young people don't think they're going to get it. They're wrong. They will get it. They'll get it at a different amount at a different age, but they will get it. Seniors think they're going to get taken advantage of. As I've said before, there are other words I could use, but I won't. And that's not going to happen either. We're not going to reduce anybody's accrued benefit, what they're currently receiving. That's not going to happen. We're going to make changes that get phased in over time. The younger you are, the wealthier you are, the more you're going to get affected. And so therefore, we have an ability to exceed the expectations of every generation of Americans. That's a win. The problem is we don't have any leadership. That will change because the Social Security Trust Fund is going to go to zero. It projected at the end of 2032. So while it's not going to be a big issue in the 2026 elections, it will be in 2028 because the next president will have to deal with it. And that's one of the reasons why we need to get started now. So, we have to reform that program. It's going to be a combination of benefit modifications, retirement age modifications, payroll cap modifications, cost of living modifications. It's going to be a combination of revenues and spending, but the people that are going to be affected the most are the younger you are and the wealthier you are, the more you're going to be affected. And that's how it ought to be.
We're going to call on Sasha Starr there. Yeah, we're going to go ahead to the panel now. David, thank you so much. I'm going to be making this more of an interactive session.
Sure.
Sasha, what are your thoughts?
My thoughts are the following. I would like to understand better, Dave, when you're talking about we have to do this or we have to do that. Who is that we? You have now in power a small group of people centered about con man by the name Donald Trump, and they are dictating, they are implementing their agenda on American people. Take, for example, your debt of almost $40 trillion. Where is it that is happening? Okay, right now there is a catastrophic war with Iran. The United States running out of interceptors for Patriot missiles, right? Each interceptor costs, I imagine, say $3 million. And you need 100,000 of those interceptors. So we are talking about $1 trillion right there. Are American people are better off than Raytheon or Lockheed Martin will be paid those trillions of dollars, and they will create these interceptors, and these interceptors will be all spent in next month or two. So this is the problem for United States, nothing else. If it wouldn't be that, there is a deficit you could slowly control, you can maybe lower interest on this, but right now everything is going against United States. Everything. It's the most hated country in the world. It cannot run the normal economic or military policies. What's your thoughts, David?
Well, I see you feel strongly about this, Sasha. The first thing is this. Let's put Iran to the side for a second, and I'll come back to that, okay? We had a structural problem before Iran. When you're spending about $2 trillion more a year than you're taking in, that is unsustainable. When your second largest and fastest growing expense is interest for which you get nothing, that's unsustainable. Coming back to something Steve said earlier, Yeah, in 1979, and there's a reason I picked that date, we had less than $1 trillion in debt. Now we have almost 40 trillion and rising rapidly. So things are out of control. But understand this, this is a bipartisan problem. At present in Washington, the Republicans are in control of the Senate, the House, and the White House. All right. In the past administration, the Democrats were in control, if you will. Neither party took steps to try to A, put our social insurance programs on a sustainable path. And secondly, neither party took steps to defuse the ticking time bomb. You're correct in saying that the Iran situation is exacerbating the problem, okay? Because we're having to spend more money on weapons, if you will, and because of the deployments over in that part of the world. And by the way, we can't produce all these weapons in 1 year. It's going to take several years to be able to do that. And the other thing that we need to be concerned about is, what do our adversaries think about this? Okay. I mean, is Russia going to try to take advantage of this? Is China going to try to take advantage of this? Is North Korea going to try to take advantage of this? Because there is an alliance against U.S. primarily, but also Western interest. Those four countries, and there are others, but they're the primary four, are aligned against our interests economically, diplomatically, militarily, and culturally. And so my real concern is, yeah, we need to wrap this Iran thing up sooner rather than later, and we can talk about it if you want. All right. But my real concern is that what is it going to do with regard to our adversaries and what are the potential consequences down the road?
Okay, a couple of things.
Yeah.
China already made a statement that Iran, it is its strategic partner.
Yeah,
and they are going to support and protect it. So is Russia.
Yeah.
Now, U.S. generals already told Trump that it's unsustainable for U.S. to fight so many wars at the same time.
Absolutely.
So you're looking at Iran, you're looking possibly China. China already made announcement that U.S. is not capable to defend its interest in Taiwan, Japan, and South Korea. They just said it just less than 24 hours ago. So in a situation like that, okay, you can bluff so many times, so many things, but your bluff will be called sooner or later. And American generals, they are talking to Trump to stop entirely this thing with Iran on any condition. Just take your things, pack them, and get out of there. Nobody wants you there. U.S. cannot protect its military bases in the region. So if they cannot protect their own military bases, what can they protect? Nothing. Zero. Therefore, all these oil producing countries in the region, they want to get rid of the United States and make their own deals with Iran. Some of the deals will be better, some of the deals will be worse. But anyway, nobody wants United States there anymore. Why don't people who are in charge don't understand that? They're giving loud and clear, just get the hell out of here. Everybody tells you, so what are you doing there? It's an incredible punishment for image of the country all over the world.
In my view, Sasha, we need to wrap this thing up. And there's no way you're going to see a land invasion of Iran for lots of reasons. Okay. There could be special forces operations on a limited basis as there were in Venezuela. In my personal view, okay, we ought to take out the energy facilities in the Karg Island, and then we ought to turn over things to other countries that are relying upon the Strait of Hormuz. We don't need energy from the Strait of Hormuz. Other people do. Okay. And so I think that we need to turn it over to the countries that do. In the book that I've got coming out, I have a chapter in the book that talks about what if we have a debt crisis, which I touched on before. If we don't change course, we have a debt crisis. In that, I talk about the the fact that this alliance exists, and it's existed for several years between China, Russia, Iran, North Korea. It's existed for several years. And if we have that debt crisis, that will embolden them. And you can count on China looking to Taiwan. You can count on Russia being able to do more with regard to Ukraine, et cetera. You can count on Iran trying to cause more problems in the Middle East. And you may have to worry about whether North Korea wants to move south. So, I don't look at this as a short-term issue. I look at this as a very serious strategic issue. That's not just an issue from an economic standpoint, but an issue from a national security and other perspectives as well.
David, thank you so much. We're just gonna kind of rotate to the other analysts and everybody. Thank you so much for being a part of this engaging discussion. Start with Dr. Sharif and then go to Toby. Dr. Sharif, what kind of global perspective do you bring to this in terms of America's economic superpower, which is a real tenet for America being a superpower? David Walker's talked about that in his books and podcasts. Is this something you think America should be worried about as the world is looking in at the United States of America?
Dr. Sharif?
Yeah, thank you. This is very interesting discussions, and for me, as I focus on economics, this is very interesting discussions. Even for my students, they regularly observe these shows. But I have some sort of information from Asia Pacific, and from the Asia Pacific, I'm observing all of the country has a challenge right now. First, we have COVID. Then there are war. Then we have climate issues. Then again, we have war in between Iran and other things. From Asia Pacific, I'm observing Honorable David Walker through Asian Development Bank CARD's regional growth forecast. So they are predicting that this regional growth will not happen because of this war. Secondly, Bank of Japan signaled possible interest rate hike. So this is also interesting that Japan also go for increasing the interest rate. If you see the Singapore also tightening their monetary policy. This is also rare because Singapore is a very open and so on. South Korea raised growth expectations. India expected to keep interest rate unchanged. Also, we are observing in India, there is a Gen Z revolutions. Specifically, they want the resignation of education ministers and it happened. Same way, Indonesia, we are observing central bank leadership change. So Asia Pacific supply chain remain under pressures because of this war, because of these other things. And according to IMF, global economy remain resilient but uneven. So 3% global growth is possible. So in that situations, what do you think? What should be the role of USA specifically for global peace? Because this war in between Iran and USA creating massive problem in energy sector, even in Bangladesh. It create massive problems with these climate things, even in Bangladesh, India. It's create massive problem for unrest, political power imbalancings. Every country's political, I want to say representative, let's say our prime minister, everyone has some tensions. Like there is an ally from Russia and China. There is an US ally. There is a Iran actually come up with the alignment and pressures. So how we can solve this economical, political, and climate-oriented challenging situation right now?
Well, first, I would say that there's absolutely no question that the conflict in Iran has had a number of adverse implications, with regard to energy prices and the ripple effect of that. Energy is a global market. And while we meaning the United States, while we don't need the energy coming out of the Persian Gulf, we can be self-sufficient. It does affect our prices. And believe me, that has an economic impact, and that also has a political impact. And another reason why we need to wrap this thing up sooner rather than later, and definitely before the midterm elections, because while President Trump is not on the ballot, a third of the senators and every member of the House are on the ballot. and the control of the Senate and the House is up for grabs. Secondly, prices affect everybody, including us. Supplies don't affect us as much because we can be self-sufficient. Although I would note that the last administration drew down the Strategic Petroleum Reserve dramatically, even though, you can debate whether or not that should have happened. It was really more for political reasons than it was for other reasons. But it is what it is. But there are other parts of the world, including Bangladesh, including European countries, that it's not just a matter of the prices, it's a matter of the supply. You need the energy. And there's a reliance on getting the energy from the Middle East. And 20 to 25% of energy comes through the Strait of Hormuz. And therefore, as I'm saying, we got to wrap this up. Okay, we got to wrap it up sooner rather than later. There's no way you're going to do regime change through air power. That's a non-starter. It was ridiculous for anybody to think about that. In fact, that's not what was promised. What was promised was to get rid of the nuclear threat, diminish their missile and drone capabilities, and to reopen the Strait of Hormuz. I think we need to focus on reopening the Strait of Hormuz. We've always got the ability to do things with regard to diminishing their nuclear ambitions. And we may or may not be able to reach an agreement on that in the near future, but we got to get the strait open, if you will, because of energy prices and because of the adverse impacts that it has in Asia and in Europe because of their reliance on the supply. And by the way, it ripples through the whole economy. The fact that energy prices are up, that affects everything. Okay. I mean, fertilizers, it affects fertilizer, it affects food prices, it affects transportation costs. And so therefore that ends up resulting in upward pressure on inflation. By the way, with regard to our Federal Reserve and monetary policy, their number one job is to fight inflation. And inflation is still higher than their target. And therefore, I think they're probably going to stay the course with regard to interest rates. Obviously, to the extent that you raise interest rates, that has an adverse effect on economic growth. But I think they're probably going to stay the course and keep rates where they are for now.
David, thank you so much. And hopefully Sasha will come back. I'm going to go to Jitobi. Jitobi, thank you for being so patient. What are your thoughts about this? I know we've talked a lot about on this show as an analyst, we talk about politically where we are, Republicans, Democrats. What do you think this means in terms of just the political dialogue and discourse we're having in America, particularly for our younger generation?
Well, there's a lot of nuance that we miss and a lot of nuance that we don't really cover or adding in context to certain situations. And it's understandable because, only having an hour to explain a complex situation, it's tough. So you can't add that extra context. For example, I'll touch base on but actually I don't want to go redundant because we're going to continue to talk about the Iran war. That's there. We know that's a problem, and being redundant about that would be bad because there are other bubbles or there's other issues that are causing a bubble. And I would much rather look at the whole because right now we are at a problem. You have the Iran war. You have the other wars that he's talking about starting from invasion of Cuba to so on and so forth. All that stuff is one thing. But then when you look at the energy prices, which you pointed out, the energy itself isn't the issue. It's more or less the other things that come through there from the fertilizer on. That's another issue. But then take into account the cuts that we had earlier where when we talk about healthcare and the health of our country, in the health in our country, from measles now as an outbreak that's really becoming a massive problem, to living Oregon Trail where we all die of dysentery because we're all pooping ourselves to death now, to all the other health problems that are coming up. So now we have a health bubble or a health issue that's creating onto that bubble. And even if you talk about the Bitcoin bubbles and so on and so forth, all these things are coming and all these things are hitting at one time. So that brings the question to a lot of individuals that are in the youth area that are looking forward to, okay, well, I'm coming into that working world and I need to navigate this and be able to get a home or be able to actually sustain or protect myself against these bubbles. And that's, I think, a solution that we need to come up with. And so, David, in your viewpoint, what is a good way for people to begin to, who are seeing these incoming crises that are coming into the working world? What are ways that you believe that they personally, because I don't want to talk on this upper level, that upper echelon, that's not where most people are. They don't care about the stock market. They don't care about all these things. They care about, can I eat? Can I get healthcare? So what are ways that you believe as a economic professional that they can protect themselves or actually insulate themselves from some of these oncoming crises that are going to happen?
All right, let me talk macro then micro. Okay. One of the biggest concerns that I have is if we look at the data, the lowest poverty rate in America is seniors. The highest poverty rate in America is children. Who are the future? Children. As I said before, for 200 years, we practiced stewardship, leaving things better off in better positions for the future. Now we're not. Now we are mortgaging the future of young people and the unborn, I might add, at record rates. We're reducing investments in the future at a time that they're going to face a lot tougher competition in the global economy. And so therefore, I think on the macro level, we got to put our finances in order. We have to make sure that the social safety net, which includes Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, et cetera, is solvent, sustainable, and secure for those who truly need it. At the same point in time, we need to make some big changes. All right. For example, I think we've overpromised in healthcare. We've overpromised, and one of the things that we need to do is we need to step back and say, and I'm picking my words carefully here, how much universal, yes, I use the word universal healthcare should be provided to every legal person in America, whether they're a citizen or not, okay, that is appropriate, affordable, and sustainable. What is basic and essential that everybody needs, and it's in our collective interest to make sure they have it. And I would respectfully suggest that's preventative wellness and catastrophic protection. Everybody should have that universal. You call that Medicare for all at that level, and that to the extent that you want more than that, you get it from a variety of sources: your employer, your industry, your union, whatever it might be. But yet you then have to have an option for people who can't get additional insurance that way through the Affordable Care Act as it's reformed or something else. But the bottom line is we need to reform our healthcare system dramatically. Okay.
And I love that point that Jatoli made, because the healthcare costs, I was going to ask that question. I mean, the costs are spiraling out of control. And we've had this problem with the deficit and debt, but now with costs rising, grocery prices, inflation, this is the problem that we're having. And the topic of the show is retirement, David. So what we're saying at a macro level is that the more and more of this problem that we have, we're cutting into incomes of people who are having a harder time living today than they ever have been in the modern history of this country.
Yeah, but one of the reasons that our healthcare system is out of control is, number one, we've never had the discussion that I just said, how much universal healthcare is appropriate, affordable, and sustainable. And affordability is not just a matter of the individual, it's also the country, okay? But in addition to that, it takes three things for any system to be successful and sustainable: properly designed incentives that encourage people to do the right thing and discourage them from doing the wrong thing; adequate transparency as to cost, quality, and other factors to provide reasonable assurance that people will do the right thing and won't do the wrong thing; and thirdly, appropriate accountability positive reinforcement if they do the right thing, negative accountability if they don't. In healthcare, we're 0 for 3. That's called a strikeout. Okay. And so when it is baseball season. So when we,
I love it. I love the sports analogies.
yeah, when we end up reforming the system, we got to make sure that we hit all those angles. By the way, the healthcare system is not the only one that's 0 for 3. We're 0 for 3 on K through 12 education. We're 0 for 3 on immigration. We're 0 for 3 on our tax policies. So we need to be able to make those fundamental changes. Let's talk for a second, about young people. Okay, when I graduated from college, I was fortunate. My parents paid for my college. All right, so I didn't have any student debt, which obviously is a burden. And I did the same thing for my kids. I paid for my kids' college. Okay, so they didn't have student debt. I got a degree that was marketable. It was an accounting degree. Accounting is how you keep score. How you keep score matters. All right. I got a good job, and I've been fortunate in that regard. But when I was 23 years old, I bought a house. That house cost $23,000. Okay, $1,000 for every year I was old. Today, and at that time, I think the average age that people bought homes was 28. Now it's 40. So young people can't afford a home for a variety of reasons. Okay, and one of the reasons they can't afford a home is because they have a lot of student debt. And I think one of the things we have to do is reform that program, because not everybody is bound for college. Not every college is the same, and not every degree is the same. And we're not doing enough, I think, to promote the trades. My son-in-law is the chief electrician for the Marine Corps Museum. He makes good money. He's got great benefits, all right? But the government doesn't encourage people to look at the trades where you can make good money, you have good benefits, support a family, and not have these student loans. Okay.
Well, to touch on that,
Yeah.
to touch on the trade issue, because
Yeah.
I think the trade issue is spot on, Dave. We are perfectly aligned on that, because we need people to realize that not everybody's going to be a doctor. Not everybody's going to be a robotics technician. Not everybody's going to be a NASA scientist. But we need the trades there because they are very important. One of the issues I think that we run across is that the trades have been seen and demonized as you're not making money. And money is the king of all. You're not going to make any money, even though you realize you can be a garbage man and make up over $100,000 a year. But we're not telling people the truth about the trades and the other issues that are out there. How do you think we can change that as a priority and not that's just a secondary thing because you failed?
No, I think we have to learn from others. Okay. Germany, for example. Germany ends up first assessing what the needs of the economy are. All right. And we have some serious needs with regard to the trades. Okay. They assess what the needs of the economy are on a macro basis. They then assess what the interests and abilities of the individuals are. All right. And then they try to match them. Right. If you will. Let me tell you a quick joke that's directly on this. So we're not all, so we have a little levity. Okay. There was a guy who was a plumber. All right. And he gets a call from this high-powered lawyer who's got a plumbing problem. So the plumber comes to the house. He spends 10 minutes, fixes the problem. The lawyer says, "How much do I owe you?" He said, "Well, that'll be $600. $600? You've only been here 10 minutes. He says, I'm a lawyer. I only charge $500 for an hour, and you're charging me $600 for 10 minutes? And then the plumber looks at him and says, "Yeah, I know. I used to be a lawyer."
That's a good one and everything like that. Just really
Mark,
quick.
please give your answer. We have about 12 more minutes, folks.
We have got a few more minutes to go and everything like that. But I did want to just say really quickly that several of our governors prided itself on community colleges and the trades and all along those lines. I know Hunt was one of them, and I know that there have been others as well. I think even Cooper was one that did it. But I'm not going to say it was only Democrats. I think there were some Republican governors that also touted the trades as well. But I was talking to a friend of mine, David, who is a filmmaker. He's out of the Los Angeles area, and he just recently came to visit his family in Hillsborough and all along those lines. So I was talking to him over the weekend, and he was telling me how much the film industry is coming to places like Atlanta and even Canada because they're getting some major incentives and all along those lines. So it's definitely leaving LA and leaving a lot of other places. So I just wanted your thoughts around the notion of incentives, industry, whether it's the car industry or other industries, into places that are not having it as much, because that's the conversation me and Ronnie Warner were having, was the fact that a lot of the industry has left LA and is now going to Atlanta, Canada, and a number of other places.
There's two sides of the coin, Mark. On one side, you have very high taxation, you have excess regulation, and you also have increasing crime problems in certain areas, all right? Especially with regard to the cities, all right? So that is a factor that causes people to want to leave, all right? And then you have situations where you have lower cost of living, less crime, okay, less regulation, and on top of that, maybe incentives to get people to come, right? So it's push-pull. Some people are being pushed out because of deterioration on where they're at, and some people are being attracted to come in because things are better and they may get incentives, and you know that exists in many regards.
One thing we didn't talk about real quickly, I wanted to interject. Mark, thank you for asking. I'm trying to drive this. Hope I'm doing all right as the pilot of the show today, guys. I'm trying.
You're doing fine.
AI disruption. We're going to bring you back to talk about that. But all of this we're talking about during one of the most disruptive times in the economy, with jobs being obsolete faster than we replenish them. So does that also affect your grandchildren, our children, in terms of their plans? Because if the jobs aren't there, how are they going to be paying down this debt? How are they going to save enough for retirement?
AI is going to be a positive and a negative. It's going to be a positive with regard to research, especially with regard to healthcare and other kind of scientific endeavors, if you will. It's going to be a positive with regard to productivity. It's going to, significantly increase the ability to get things done a lot quicker, especially if it relates to research, in writing, although I don't use it for writing. I think there's an ethical issue there. But AI is going to be negative if you're in a job that is not a value-added job. Okay, for example, if all you're doing is doing research, AI can do that. Okay. On the other hand, AI can't do emotional intelligence. And in addition, AI doesn't always get things right. You need to have people that know enough to know when it's not right, and to be able to correct it. And so I think it's going to be a positive and a negative. And I think one of the things that people have to keep in mind, we've already talked about the fact that we need to be promoting the trades more. We've already talked about the fact we need to match macroeconomic needs with individual preferences and abilities. Okay. But I think, the other thing that we have to do is, we've got to be more even-handed in encouraging alternative careers, alternative paths, and people have to be a lot more disciplined about, if they are going to go to college, what kind of degree are they going to get and where they're going to get it from. And I also think that may have to have something to do with regard to eligibility for student loans and the sharing of risk between the institutions and the individuals if their degrees don't end up resulting in people making enough money to support the loan payments.
Real quickly, and then we've got eight more minutes, folks. How does this affect? At the end of the show, I want to get your top 3 recommendations if you had a 1-hour meeting with the president or the next president of the United States and the Congress. But the question I'll ask before that is, how does retirement planning change now for our children, our grandchildren? What should they do being different if I'm 35, 40 years old compared to when you were that age? Any advice there?
Plan, save, invest, get out of debt as quick as you can. Recognize that there will be a social safety net that will be there, but that you need to do more with regard to saving and investing because you're not going to be able to live the same standard of living in retirement, if you don't do that. And keep in mind that you're likely to spend more years in retirement than you're planning on. Therefore, you need to think about streams of income that are guaranteed throughout your life. And in addition to that, you need to think about working longer. We had to keep in mind, we've gone from the agricultural age to the industrial age to the knowledge age. Okay. And so people have the ability to work longer because they have longer lives. And sometimes they have to work longer because they haven't saved enough and they can't afford to retire. But in other cases, they want to work longer. And I think, coming back to what we said before, we need to make sure that we've got incentives for people to continue to contribute to the economy as long as they're willing and able to do it. At the same point in time, a sound, secure social safety net for those who can.
Fantastic. Yeah, I want to get everyone's opinion before we ask David the final question. But one of the best parts about being a political analyst is the political drama and soap opera we live in with Congress. Let's talk about the presidency in 28. Some names that have come out recently is Gavin Newsom, the governor of California. AOC now rising in the polls as possibly the front runner, surprisingly. You've got Andy Beshear, governor of Kentucky. How important do you think is the Democrats and the Republicans when they nominate presidential candidates? And I'm just going to throw that out there. Governor of California, a lot of debt in California. It doesn't seem to be the right person that would talk about it if you look at their state. Not all his fault, kind of built up over years. But what are your thoughts, David, and everyone else in the panel? Who would you like to see in the White House in 2 years running against Vance or Rubio?
Well, first, I'm a political independent. Okay. And so I make my decisions based upon the person and their policies rather than the political party affiliation. My general view is that there's a fundamental difference with President of the United States. That is not only the commander-in-chief of the military, it's the chief executive officer of the United States. And therefore, I believe anybody who's going to be going for that job needs to have significant chief executive officer experience. Clearly, a governor does. They're the chief executive officer of their state. They also are commander-in-chief with regard to the National Guard and Reserve in their state. And so they clearly qualify. There are other people who have had CEO-related experience, either in government because they were head of a cabinet agency or another major agency, or in the private sector because they were head of a major enterprise. So I take CEO level experience as a priority. And then if you have CEO level experience, how'd you do? The one person you mentioned did terrible. Okay.
Yeah, I know.
I'm not going to talk about.
Yeah, I know. I know him personally. I know all these guys.
Yeah. And for a political reason, I think the Democrats would be better off picking somebody with CEO experience from either a purple or red state.
Yeah. So Beshear, that's why he's rising in the polls, the governor. My final question.
Yeah.
Okay, that's great. I want to get everyone's input on that, but I'm going to throw it out there as a way for you to close out the show. But then just everybody chime in with what you think, any input you have. I guess my final question to you, David, and you can wait till the end of the show, is if you were with the Speaker of the House, the Congress, the President of the Senate in D.C., or the President of the United States for 1 hour, what would be your top 3 recommendations to get us out of where we are today?
Well, first, I'm not going to talk about Iran. I've already told you what I thought about Iran. Okay.
Yeah, for the deficit,
So
the economic.
the 3 things are: 1, the president should form a government transformation task force that ends up looking at what government's doing, how is it doing, how is it measuring success, to propose a fundamental restructuring of the federal government to make sure that it's future focused, outcome based, and sustainable from a financial standpoint. That can be done through executive order. Secondly, we need a statutory fiscal commission to reform Social Security and to get debt to GDP down to a reasonable, sustainable level over the next 10 to 15 years that would educate and engage the American public, make a set of recommendations, guaranteed vote in Congress. And thirdly, we need a constitutional amendment that establishes a credit card limit on how much debt as a percentage of the economy we can take on, absent very limited and extraordinary circumstances, and that sets a target for us to lower our debt to GDP over the next 10 to 15 years with automatic target triggers and enforcement mechanisms. Those are the three things, and they're in the book and a lot of detail behind it.
Looking forward to getting the book. Folks, we're winding down 3 more minutes. Everyone, you get 30 seconds to a minute to give us an insight of what you thought about this show, any ideas to get back to David Walker and anyone out there that might be running for an office, and that will not be including me.
You're not going to run for office, Steve? I thought you would be a great president. But
I've retired from politics for now, although I have the support of all of you. But I'm enjoying my new life, living again, and being, I guess, kind of like a David M. Walker. I'm going to write a book, going to be a media guy, maybe get on some national news shows. And hey, call it a day. Just see my children and my I don't have any grandchildren yet. I want some. But that's on my bucket list. But anyone with 2 minutes or less, what do you have to say, Jacoby?
Anything else, Shelby?
Dr. Sharif, sorry.
Yeah, no, thank you. This is actually very interesting discussions, but for this global challenging situation, for economic reformations, we need to work together. By World Talent Economic Forum, we are trying to develop South-South corridor and North-South corridor. This is very important. We do not need war. We do not need any kind of irrelevant activities. We need strong political leaders and make progress with economic collaborations. We need open society for make more business, and we need to take care of the human activities and so on. Thank you.
No problem.
And then Mark Lee, and then we got to close out.
Now we got to get ready to close out and everything like that. I was curious what David thinks of Westmore or Shapiro, because I think that both of them have a strong possibility, even though they're not necessarily in purple states and everything like that. But definitely, I think that they might be interesting. So I just wondered your thoughts about them, because they are more established candidates versus progressives.
Shapiro is in a purple state. Bashir is in a red state. Moore is in a dark blue state.
Yeah,
I think Moore would have a better chance as VP than a presidential candidate.
folks, we're going to wrap up. I want to thank everyone for being on the show. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to host. I look forward to being back next week for Economics Monday. As we close out, I want to thank David M. Walker for all that he does for all of us. At the end of the day, as he said eloquently in one of his podcasts, I was referring to the show, the 4 elements of a superpower: economic power, military power, diplomatic power, and cultural influence. And today, we talked about potentially a chink in the armor in the United States of America, the national debt deficit. And David, hopefully we can get your book and read about how we can preserve the strong United States of America economically for future generations. So thank you for that.
Thanks, everybody. See you next week.
See you
See you next week. And thank you for joining us on Pod TV, Roku TV. Thank you, Mark Lee.
Yeah.
I'll stay back.